Hey guys, so today I ended up purchasing a few new pigments. The raw umber, raw sienna, permanent light, green light, and the transparent brown oxide. Um, I'll probably experiment with this later, but I'm really interested in the transparent brown oxide. Gamblin had a transparent earth red, or their transparent red oxide for their student grade, but this is an artist grade that's a series 1, which I thought was it was at a really cheap price, so I thought I wanted to experiment with that since a lot of people seem to include a transparent brown on their palette. And then I realized that this is actually the first Winsor Newton artist grade pigment that I have ever purchased, but I also had a bunch of student grade ones from a while back, and I thought it would be interesting to compare some of the earth tones with the earth tone, like the Winsor Newton earth tones with the Gamblin earth tones. I'm not too sure if it's a fair comparison since these ones are student grade. So the Winton oil colors are student grade, and the Gamblin ones here that I have are professional grade. But I thought it would be interesting just to compare the temperature and the hue to see just what the differences are and which ones I prefer. So this is the first time I'm going to be testing with the transparent brown and these two here as well. So I'll see. Let's give it a try and see what happens. Right, and also I picked up these two new palette knives. I'm used to more of a sort of standard one here. I forget the name. I'm not too sure about the name of this one. But I picked up two new different shapes from my local art store, so I wanted to play with those and see how they are as well. Okay, so we're gonna test the transparent brown oxide. Let's take a look. Let's put it here. Okay. So I mean, it's really much darker, and I expect that from a transparent color, darker than what it shows on the tube. Let's see. I'm going to add a little bit of white to see just the exact hue, and that's a Gamblin artist grade white. It's a really nice color actually. I feel that it seems like a really red brown. I'd be curious to see that next to. Okay, so I'm gonna bring the other ones in. So that's the transparent brown oxide, and then I'm gonna test out the burnt umber by Gamblin. So this is a professional grade as well. Okay. So I'm just gonna put that. It almost looks the same color visually, but I'm going to add white and see. Looks like a similar color, but that one's obviously more transparent. I can see more red when I just pull it across. But let's add some white and see. I'm just gonna make sure I just grab white. Okay. So actually the burnt umber is a much more pale color, less saturated. I ended up looking up the burnt umber on the Munsell system chart that they have on the gambling website, and it does show that it is a very muted orange, but I believe it leans more towards the red, so more of a red orange. But when I compare this transparent brown to the burnt umber, that's actually much more saturated. That's very interesting. So what I'm really curious about is how it compares to a burnt sienna. So I don't actually have a Gamblin's burnt sienna. I looked up a bunch of videos online, and they've all kind of said that they don't like the burnt sienna from Gamblin. So I have a let's see, is a student grade burnt sienna from Winsor Newton. I'm not too sure how that would compare. Hopefully it's just that the pigment is not as powerful, but I could probably just basically add more to the white and see. Hopefully that's a decent comparison of the hue. Okay, because right now I've been kind of nervous about putting together my palette. There's like a lot of different people and different, I guess, schools of thought about different types of palettes, and then I was using a dual primary palette with the green, but I'm wanting to experiment with the earth tones because I like the idea of mixing from the dark upwards. And I saw some people on YouTube mention about their palette setup and liking to mix from dark to light, and then having a basically really dark primary set. So that would be the raw umber, burnt sienna, and ivory black as a very dark blue for the ivory black, burnt red for the burnt umber, and yellow for the raw umber. Okay, so I'm gonna put the burnt sienna. So that's the student grade burnt sienna, Winsor Newton on that side, and I'm gonna compare them. Okay, I'm gonna fix that. Sorry about that. Okay. So just pulling across, I can see that it's much more saturated, which I mean, burnt sienna is a higher value, I believe. So that makes sense. And then I'm gonna pull some white. And that's the professional grade white in a student grade Winsor Newton burnt sienna. So I see that that's much more red, much more toward the orange. So I'm just trying to feel the mixture and see if I feel a tactile difference in the student grade versus professional grade. It seems not too bad when I add the professional white. But I'd be curious actually to compare the Winsor Newton burnt sienna with the Gamblin transparent earth red. So they're transparent red compared to a Winsor Newton semi-transparent actually, it doesn't really say on the bottle or the tube of the Winsor Newton whether or not it's a transparent, but to me it seems like a semi-transparent. Okay, so that's the burnt sienna. So next I want to compare the Winsor Newton burnt umber with the Gamblin burnt umber. So that's the Gamblin burnt umber, and this is a student grade burnt umber from Winsor Newton. I just want to compare. I don't think it matters if it's student grade or professional grade in terms of the color, but let's take a look. So just comparing the way it looks out of the tube, the Winsor Newton seems darker. Let's see. Seems like the same transparency, which is like a semi-transparent. Again, I'm going to add the professional grade white from Gamblin. That's it. So I added only a little bit of white, and it seemed to really drop the lighten the value really fast. That's probably because it's a student grade pigment, so there's less actual pigment in the mixture, but that's just a guess from me. So if I add a bit more back, comparatively, the Winsor Newton looks a bit more saturated. I'm just gonna grab this and actually push more in there and see if that, just to double check that. Yeah, so the Gamblin seems a bit more muted here, and then this one seems a bit more saturated. It also does seem to lean a little warmer, so it does look like there's more red in that. So again, that's transparent brown, which is sort of like an in-between of these. So it's like a very muted red orange between these two, this being more muted, and then the transparent brown going towards more of the orange and more saturation. And this is the burnt sienna, which is a really powerful red orange, a muted red orange. I'm sure if I compared it next to like a cadmium red, it probably wouldn't look as strong in terms of towards the red. So let's see. So that's the burnt umber from Winsor Newton. Next I want to try out the raw umber from Gamblin. And this is the first time I have tried this, so I'm just gonna see how it looks. I just picked it up earlier today. So I'm not too sure if it's the lighting in the room, but it looks much more dark and black visually compared to let's say these two, actually these three really. So let's try this out. Okay, I'm just gonna make sure I wipe off the palette knife and make sure I don't accidentally mix anything. Let's see. Okay, so we have that, which is another semi-transparent. I can actually check on the bottle this time. Semi-transparent. Right. And I actually want to see visually if I can notice a difference just without mixing any white. It's actually, yeah, there's much more of a red in that still. I'm gonna mix a white. I'm gonna actually grab some new white just in case I don't want to mix it. Wow. Okay, that's actually a really gray color, which I really like that it's really neutral, because I feel like that makes it easier to work in the shadows when it's there, it's so subtle. On the phone, on the camera, it almost looks like just a straight up gray. Supposedly this is a very muted yellow, which I do see it when I take a kind of overview look in the light. It does have a little bit of a yellow shade to it. Okay, so that is actually pretty cool. I'd be really curious to see how I use these in actual painting. So I don't actually have a professional grade burnt sienna on my palette right now in my setup, but I actually really like this color, and that's their student grade, so I'm curious. I'm assuming their professional grade is just more pigment load in there. Okay, so next I'm going to try a raw sienna from Gamblin. Okay, make sure the focus is there, and okay, so right out of the tube, it's definitely a step up in value to these four here, so I feel like it belongs to more of the value family of the burnt sienna. Supposedly it is supposed to have more red than a yellow ochre, which I'm just gonna pull out a Gamblin yellow ochre, and I'm gonna just have it there to compare. Okay. Right, so right next to it, definitely I can see that there's much more red in the raw sienna. And I definitely notice more of a saturation there. So I can see that this would be able to mix more, a little bit more intense color than the yellow ochre. I'm just gonna add some white and see how it turns out. Definitely a step up in value to these, so definitely more paired with that again. I actually really like this color. There's a lot of warmth there with the red in there. Okay, and I'm gonna pull some of the yellow ochre. So the raw sienna was also a semi-transparent, and the yellow ochre is also a semi-transparent. So I'm gonna add white to this. Okay. Definitely can see a change in hue between the two. actually trying it, I was actually expecting a bit less of a jump, but that is quite a nice jump towards the red. Okay. Definitely finding this knife is not as easy to control. I can't really scoop as easily as, let's say, the more standard one that people mix with. Like, I can really just scoop up. This is definitely like a lot longer, and that definitely makes a difference too. I feel that when I bend it, it just bends as a whole stick. Rather, this is like, you can see that it just really just bends at the very end. Okay. Okay. And then next I wanted to compare one final color, which is the yellow ochre of Winsor Newton. So this is another student grade one, but I don't think it really matters, but let's just put it here. Haven't really used the Winsor Newtons, so I can see there's like the oil build up. Okay. Let's see. So in comparison, I don't think visually it seems almost the same. There's no real, not as much of a difference in temperature in these brands. I noticed that this seems a little brighter. Seems a little brighter, more intense in saturation. But I'm wondering if that's just the lighting of my room right now. Okay, I'm gonna add some white and see. Definitely seems to dull down a lot faster. I think that's because of the student grade. It seems a bit more sticky. Like I can even hear it just kind of stick to the knife. Not too sure the exact reason for that. So even like on the two knives, so this was the Gamblin one on the left and the Winsor Newton on the right. You can see that it's a brighter. Let's take a look. It's a little bit brighter, I think. But this one has more white right now. Definitely feeling a stickiness. I'm not too sure if that's just because I let these sit for a while or if that's just the extra oil that came out of the tube. Yeah, let's take a look again. feels a little bit more syrupy. I don't know. When I pull it across, it doesn't seem to have the same weight as the Gamblin. But again, that might just be the student grade. All right. Okay, so there's actually one more that I have in my setup. It's the Venetian Red. I realized while I was filming another video that it would be good to compare this to the other ones. So I'm very curious to compare it to Burnt Sienna, more of the reds. So let's see where this falls. So right out of the tube, oops. Anyways, right out of the tube, I see that this is definitely a step up from the Burnt Sienna. I'm just gonna pull that. Definitely Burnt Sienna is darker, so I feel like Venetian Red goes more towards yellow ochre, towards with the yellow ochre and the raw sienna range. I'm curious as to the hue. It's definitely definitely, even from the name, it's Venetian Red. So there's definitely more red in the pigment instead of the Burnt Sienna having some yellow, making it more orange. So I definitely see that when I compare it here. Definitely the strongest out of all the other ones. Definitely a really strong, much more strong color. I'm sure something like Naphtha Red or Cadmium is definitely even way above that, above this Venetian Red. But definitely curious to experiment with this because this is a opaque color. Usually opaque colors in high saturation are quite expensive, especially the cadmium ones. Often, for example, I have a Hansa Yellow Light, and I bought that one before a cadmium because I also have a cadmium yellow medium, and definitely a huge price difference. But I definitely appreciate the opaque quality. Definitely covers up much stronger than the Hansa Yellow. But yeah, just wanted to compare this as well. And definitely I would say I would group it with these. And I'm curious if I take the yellow ochre actually from here. I'm just gonna actually grab all of that to see how close I can get to the Burnt Sienna of the Winsor Newton. Definitely still overpowered with the red. I'm gonna pull a bunch more of that. Somehow still a bit different. I'm gonna add white. I think that is pretty close little bit more. Now I think that's even too warm compared to that. So just comparing the Winsor Newton to the Gamblin Venetian Red, I would say it's pretty close. So I am wondering if I could get away with that instead of buying a burnt sienna, but I really like that color, so I still might add that to my setup. Definitely easier to use this smaller palette knife for color mixing here. Yeah, let's see, it's more pale. Not exactly the same, but pretty close. Similar. This seems a little bit warmer. Maybe if I add some of the raw sienna, let's see. Really interesting. Similar, but not quite. Just comparing. Definitely more orange. It's not too far off, actually. But definitely this has a darker value, so that's definitely easier to keep within that range, and this I'm sort of fighting to get down, but it's actually really cool to see and understand why people decide on which pigments. Definitely this is easier to keep at a lower value, so, and it does definitely more intense at a lower value. This is definitely at a little bit of a higher value, even when I try to load that in. But definitely more red. So, I mean, it's hard to compare those two directly, but it was an interesting experiment. Great. Okay, well, thanks for watching this comparisons video. I did buy the permanent green light, but I think I'll just keep this video to the earth tones. Also, visually, you can compare any of the values. I do have a scale at the bottom here. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this helped some of you with your decisions. Cheers, guys.